That's right.
So yeah, today are we
Yeah.
the moods of the mind. So the topic for today is basically digging into the psychology of the mind, how the mind works, the different states of the mind, and we'll analyze the qualities of the mind and what's the best way to purify the mind. So we'll be discussing. Of course, this is a huge topic, and ideally you could do a multi-part seminar, but we're just taking a slice from that big topic. So if there's any specific direction you guys want to sort of take this discussion into, please feel free to jump in. This is not a monologue, this is more of a discussion. So I'll keep pausing every now and then to get some feedback, any questions, any things you want to add. So feel free to jump in at any point if you want to add something. So yeah, like I was saying, this is a huge topic, but we'll try to cover some aspect of this, the mind. So let me start with this question. Have you guys had this experience recently, in the recent past, or maybe any time in the past, where the mind has gotten the better of you? Like either you just finish typing that message and you click send, and right when you hit send, you're like, bad idea. There is nothing you can do to take that back, or you said something really impulsively, or you did something really, and you have no idea why you did it. And so, any experiences like that where you regretted doing something impulsively? Any volunteers?
Yes, in past but not now.
And any details, if it's not too private, any details you want to give of what you did and how it made you feel?
I believe that is because of emotion, too much emotion involved in that. So
Emotions. We'll talk about that also. How emotions and the mind, what's the correlation between the two? Any other volunteers of any situation where,
Like anger, if you have anger that comes up, it can lead you to impulsivity and saying something that you later regret.
anger especially is one of those situations. You say something and you really regret. So yeah, times like these, like the mind just gets us, and we feel almost like not in control of the mind. So so Bhagavad Gita actually describes this position of the mind, of why that is. Bhagavad Gita, anybody not familiar with the Bhagavad Gita here? It's in, yeah.
I'm not familiar.
Perfect, yeah. This is the Bhagavad Gita. This is like the yogi's handbook. Every tradition has one central book, like
Quran.
Yeah. Different books, different traditions have central books. This is a yogi's, bhakti yogi's handbook called Bhagavad Gita. And this is a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, where they're having this dialogue. And Arjuna's asking all these questions about life, about ethics and morality. And one of the things that comes up is the mind. And he's asking Krishna. And so Krishna responds by saying, this is the Sanskrit, Bandhuratmatmanastasya, Yenatmaivatmanajitaha, Anatmanastastu Shatrudve, Vartitatmaiva Shatruva. Krishna tells Arjuna, for him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends, but for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. What an interesting statement, right? Imagine one single person can be both your best friend and your worst enemy. Like usually you have people who are friends, and also sometimes they can have some hostility towards you. But here Krishna is saying that the mind can not only be your worst enemy, but also your, not just an average friend, but your best friend. It's a really strange position the mind plays. It can be your worst enemy and your best friend. And why is that? Because you're living with this mind. The mind is with you. So you're carrying this mind, this so-called person with you. So this entity called the mind is living with you and can be your best friend or your worst enemy. So let's dig in deeper into this mind. Like, what is this mind? How do you define the mind? Any volunteers? Anybody want to share what does it mean to you, the mind? If you were to define it in one sentence, or if you
Consciousness.
Consciousness. Nice. That's a nice definition. Any other adjectives you want to throw? What?
It's not physical.
Excellent.
Nobody can perceive physical things.
Not physical consciousness. Yeah.
Byproduct. It's a byproduct of your construct.
a neuroconstruct,
Yes.
byproduct of your neuroconstruct. Right. What's your name? Melissa. Thank you. Any other definitions or ideas of what could the mind be? What
Perhaps
does the mind
one's
mean to you?
thoughts.
Huh?
Perhaps one's thoughts.
One's thoughts, yeah, one's thoughts. And Isa, right? Isa, you mentioned that emotions also have to do with the mind. So in here, Krishna warns us the mind can be our best friend or worst enemy. So across time, different sociologists and psychologists and philosophers have spent centuries and decades trying to analyze the mind, and it's such a mysterious thing, the mind. Nobody understands what the mind is. Because you can't see the mind. Like the body is more physical, like you said, it's non-physical? Is that the word you used? If you can see something, you can sort of analyze and break it apart and put it back together. But how do you deal with this entity which you cannot see or perceive, in a gross sense, and also something that can act either as your best friend or your worst enemy, like this verse states. So it's just a hard thing to sort of grasp. It's hard to understand what this mind is because you can't see it. So out of curiosity, I thought, okay, let's try to define this word mind in a more modern, contemporary, scientific way. Is one of the definitions that comes up is the mind is a set of faculties, including cognitive aspects such as consciousness, you use the word consciousness, imagination, perception, thinking. Like you, Henry, did you name Henry? You mentioned thoughts. So thinking, intelligence, judgment, language, and memory, as well as non-cognitive aspects such as emotion, like you mentioned, and instinct. So this is, of course, a broad definition of the mind. So people have described the mind in many ways, and like I said, different philosophers have tried to sort of grapple with this concept of the mind. But now, let me throw this shocking statement to you guys. Are you guys ready? This could be the most controversial thing you've ever heard. Say yes at your own risk.
Give me a minute.
Yeah. You gotta be ready for the impact, right? You're like I said, say yes at your own risk. You might just get up and discuss and just leave. Half the crowd just leaves. So here's a shocking, controversial statement, if I may say. Usually we think of the mind as our brain. But the mind is not our brain. The ancient Bhakti text describes that the mind is actually non-different from the heart. The mind is in the heart. What we are used to describing the mind as, we usually see the mind as like the brain and intelligence. Some people say it's this and that. That's why I first try to ask, what do you mean by the mind? So different people have different definitions of the mind. For some it means this, for some it means this, and then I pulled up a philosopher's definition of the mind. So this way we looked at different angles of what the mind could mean. But what does the Bhakti, the sacred scriptures of Bhakti Yoga explain? How does that explain the mind? So Bhakti Yoga and Bhagavad Gita, all of this explains that actually mind comes from the Sanskrit word called as manasa, mana. So from mana, some of you might know, Sanskrit is an ancient language. This is spoken thousands and thousands of years ago. And it's known as the language of the gods. So in Sanskrit, the mind means, the word for mind is mana or manasa. So from mana comes mind. You see there's a similarity between the word mana and mind. So the scriptures of Bhakti Yoga explains that manasa or the mind is actually residing in the heart space, the heart chakra. And further describes what this mind, this entity, this mysterious entity called as the mind, is actually a seat of perception. It is a storehouse of impression or a repository of everything you perceive, you feel, everything you experience in life is actually done through the agency or the faculty of the mind. So in one sense, this mind is like a screen where you project different things. Like you have a projector that you sort of project different things on a screen. So the mind is like a screen or things which perceives different things. It's like a storehouse of emotions and impression. Everything you perceive is stored in the mind. Or mind is also, for the context of the discussion, we use the word mind interchangeably with the word heart. So the mind and heart, they're used interchangeably. And this may be different to what you have sort of commonly used the word mind as. But here in this, for the context of this discussion, we use the word mind synonymously with the word heart. So the mind, Bhakti Yoga, Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures explain the mind is actually in the heart space. And it's a seat of emotion. Everything we perceive is all connected with the mind. That's why you nicely explain
Yes.
that the mind is like
There's-
emotions.
There's some holy ayat in my holy book. Sumun bukmun umyun fahum layar jaun. और हमने इनके दिलों पर मोहर लगा दी है. तो ये देख नहीं, they cannot see, they cannot watch, they cannot hear because we have embedded their hearts. So I can relate.
Yeah, and all these different traditions, they all actually convey the same message. They approach it from different angles and they try to explain it in a different way. And to further elaborate this point, to prove this point that the mind is actually closely connected to the heart, and like we discussed, heart has close connections with emotions, right? So the mind has a close connection with emotion. So the mind is not here, mind is actually here. So to prove that point, for example, let's say you're going through a traumatic situation, right? When you experience a stroke or a heart attack, you hear shocking news and it impacts your emotion. You don't say, like you're getting a heart attack or like your brain is getting attacked because of emotions. You say, you clutch your heart. So what is the correlationship? Because in a more medical terms, like heart is simply seen as a biological pump that just pumps oxygen, and you don't necessarily connect heart with emotion. But still, when you get some traumatic news, something emotional, you immediately experience something in your heart. You clutch your heart, experiencing a heart attack. That's a proof that the mind, heart, emotions, they're actually all referring to the same thing. Or let's say you're in love, right? You don't sort of express that saying, oh, I'm in love. You don't clutch your head and say you're in love. You sort of say you're in love. So again, the mind is not in the brain, it's in the heart. It's in the heart space, the heart chakra. So that's the mind. So we'll actually analyze this mind and how it correlates with different entities such as the intelligence, the senses. And again, Bhagavad Gita goes into detail to describe how these different aspects correlate, how they work together. So one example is if you have to sort of, how does mind, intelligence, and senses, and how do they all correlate? One example is we can use the example of a computer, right? Everybody knows the different parts of a computer. So the mind is like a hard disk. Like a hard disk basically is what houses the software. Right? Everything you install is on a hard disk. And then you have a CPU RAM. That's like the intelligence. You have these CPU cards. So that's what adds the processing power of a computer. So that's like the intelligence, like the CPU. The heart is like the hard disk. And then you have like senses. Senses are like the input-output devices or input-output plugs. So the yogic texts explain that the senses are like a portal that convey all of this information from the outside world. It's like a pipeline or a portal. Everything you experience is actually done through the agency of the senses. And we have 5 senses as we learn in school, right? The sense of hearing, sight, smelling, touch, and taste, and things like that. So these 5 senses are like portals that convey signals and information. It's like an input-output device port of a computer. All of the exchange of information happens through this. So once this information is ingested, next it is stored in the heart. That's like the hard disk. So all of this information is stored in the hard disk or the mind. So once the heart is perceiving all of this, the mind, like we discussed, is a storehouse of impressions, a repository of everything you perceive and process and analyze. So everything is stored in the heart, and then the heart is constantly in this process of deciding if something is good or bad, good, bad. And this is going on subconsciously all the time. You're walking by a street, you see a trash or something in your subconsciously, you try to sort of walk away bad, or you see a good story, you think it's good. So subconsciously, this is always going on. The mind is in this process of accepting, rejecting, accepting, and rejecting. So once the mind decides if something is good or bad, then the intelligence steps in and thinks, okay, if something is good, how can I maximize this? And if something is bad, how can I minimize that thing? So that is the intelligence. That's like the CPU or the RAM, the processing power of your computer. So like this, we see the mind, intelligence, and the senses, they all correlate with each other. And so the software basically is installed in the hard disk. And what is the software in terms of our analogy. Software is our upbringing, our cultural upbringing. Everything we experience through childhood is all stored in this repository of impression called as the mind or the heart. So right from the time you were born, everything that you experience in your life is all stored in this hard disk of the mind. And that's like the software that you're installing in the hard disk. So the software is our impressions, our cultural upbringing that is stored in the mind. And the chassis of this computer is like the body itself, right? Like the computer has like cables and plastic and metals and screws and things like that. That's like our physical body, bones and cartilage and things like that. So if you notice, what is missing in this analogy? What's one thing that's missing?
Connection with God.
Yeah, that's excellent. Wonderful. Huh? Yes. Where is the user? You see, we talked about the hard disk, we talked about the CPU.
Who designed this?
Who designed? Excellent. Those are the two things that are missing. Wonderful. Thank you. So we talked about all of this aspect, but where is the user? Someone has to use this computer, right? And what is the user in terms of our body? That's a soul, right? And then you said, where's God? Someone who has designed a superior intelligence that designs this. So these two things are missing in this analogy. So there has to be a user that operates this framework of this machine. So to give more example of how these different aspects work together, there's an ancient text, yogic text called Out Manisha, which further describes how these five act. So this is a very common example given. You see a chariot with 5 horses that are running. There's a chariot driver who's holding the reins. There's a passenger who looks really petrified. And then there's like the chariot itself. So now if you notice the 5 horses, what's strange about these 5 horses?
They have a mark like eyes and then nose and then tongue over here. So
great observation. And what does that mean?
Ear as well. So
yeah, so what does that mean?
I believe it represents the 6th sense, as the Hindu wear that bindi and they represent like the 6th sense.
Wow, we got some smart audience today. Usually I have to wait for people to sort of catch up, but right away I'm getting all these points that, yeah, so these 5 horses have 5 symbols. So they're symbolic of the 5 senses. So one horse has a symbol of eye, other has nose, ears, and so on. So the scripture called Out Manisha explains that these 5 horses are like 5 senses. And what is the chariot driver holding?
Reins.
Yeah. So any guesses of what that could be? Yeah.
The ropes, and they want some kind of, they want some kind of work from them, holding them. The people around them are looking and they're saying like, the horses are doing all this stuff, but no, like the one who is riding them.
Mm-hmm.
It's controlling something.
Our impressions.
Our impressions, yeah. And Matanga, our intelligence. So he says, what is the driver holding? You said?
The reins.
Yeah. So what is the reins? We are getting closer. What is that symbolic of?
Controlling the senses. That's
Okay. So we are getting closer now.
Mind.
Yes, who said that?
The mind it integrates all the senses.
Yeah. So that the reins that the driver is holding is like the mind. And the chariot driver himself or herself is the intelligence. And the passenger, again, who looks really petrified and has no clue what's going on, is a soul who is completely wondering what's going on. And the chariot itself is like the body. So the scripture called Out Manisha explains that our human body is like a chariot with 5 horses. Now what happens if these 5 horses start running in different directions? It's a complete chaos, right? It's so, it's like a problematic situation.
Is that the mind your worst enemy?
Yeah, actually it's the 5 senses. Imagine if the 5 senses start running in different directions. The eyes want to see something, the ears want to hear something, the tongue wants to taste something. And this way, the 5 senses are constantly chasing different directions. And what happens is the reins, they're connected to the horses, right? So wherever the horses go, the reins are also sort of following where the horses go. And the chariot driver is also sort of helpless. So the one way the chariot driver can control the 5 horses is through the agency of the reins. He has to pull back, control. Someone said control, right? The reins symbolizes control. So through what I'm trying to get at is through our intelligence, we use our intelligence to control the mind, and the mind is like the reins. So once you control your mind, the senses will automatically be in control. So the mind has a really unique position in all of this, where the mind is like an interface between the intelligence and the senses. Again, like we were saying, we discussed at the beginning, this topic of the mind is such a huge topic. We can have many, many seminars going into this. We'll just take a slice of this topic and we'll analyze. So in brief, we discussed of what the mind is. It's a mysterious entity that we're living in, and like we discussed, it can be our best friend. It can give us the best kind of counsel, or our worst enemy, not just like an average, regular, weak enemy. Our worst enemy. It can inflict the most damage to us. That's the mind. So we discussed briefly about what the mind is, right? So now we'll segue into analyzing the qualities of the mind. Let's take a look at how the mind acts, and it's really helpful to introspect and self-reflect when we are aware of how the mind plays a number on us, plays a game on us. It helps us analyze when we are aware of how the mind functions. So our first analogy is mind can act like the waves. If anybody who spent a lot of time in the ocean or the sea, you see, if you live by the sea, that there's a lot of waves constantly coming and going, right? And it never stops. The waves never stop. You'll never see an ocean just like frozen, right? Maybe still, but still there's some kind of ripples in the ocean. So in shore of an ocean, the waves are constantly coming and going, coming and going. That's like our mind. Mind gets these thoughts, and these thoughts are always coming and going and coming and going and coming and going, non-stop. It never stops. Our mind will never stop having these thoughts. So much so that it is said that some psychologists, they explain that the human mind gets, at the very least, 80,000 thoughts a day. That is like a thought or more a second. You're constantly getting thoughts. Even when you think you're not getting thoughts, you're getting thoughts about not getting thoughts. So this way there's constantly an inflow of thoughts. They come and they retreat. Again they come and they recede. Again they come and they recede. On and on and on. This way the mind, so much so that even when we're dreaming, we think, okay, if I go to sleep, I'll get a break. But even when you sleep, in form of dreams, you're getting thoughts. Even when you're under anesthesia, some patients have reported that even under anesthesia, they've had dreams. So the mind can never be still. Even in coma, some people have reported when they come out of a coma, they've reported having some experiences, dreams, or some subtle interaction with the people out in that vicinity of that patient. So this way we learn that we cannot stop the thoughts. Sometimes people, if you ask on the street, what does meditation mean to you? People say, oh, I think meditation means this, I think meditation means that. Some people say meditation means to control the thoughts. In the history of humanity, like in the history of philosophers and sociologists and psychologists, have you ever seen a man or a woman who has no thoughts? They're simply sitting like this, blank. Nothing's going on. You ask what's going on, what are you thinking? Nothing. Has it ever happened that someone has no thoughts at all? It's impossible to not have thoughts. The thoughts will go on, but the ancient texts of yoga, they explain that one has to reform our thoughts. From material, we have to transform that to spiritual. So this way, like an ocean which constantly has thoughts on and on and on, our mind, like an ocean, constantly has waves coming and going and coming and going. Our mind constantly gets thoughts that come and go. Just like in an ocean or a sea, these waves sometimes can be so dangerous that even the best of swimmers, as you guys know, even they stand no chance if it's like a stormy ocean or a stormy sea. Those waves can completely drown you, right? But those same waves, if you know how to harness that energy, can take you safely back to the shore. So our mind, which can act like the waves, which can drown us, the same thoughts like which can act like stormy seas, can actually take us back to the shore. So that's a unique position of the mind. The mind constantly gets these thoughts. So it's not simply said that the mind is our worst enemy. Yeah, it can act, but it can also be our best friend. So how can we make our minds the best friend? We'll talk about that at the end. So the next example is the mind can act like the wind, you know, like a stormy wind. Wind can actually have like a nice cooling effect, nice gentle breeze, but also a wind can take on a destructive form. Like we have tornadoes and hurricanes and by the way, like I keep saying, feel free to jump in if you wanna add. Yeah.
What was the reference of the person in the chariot again? The reins were the mind, the horses were the senses. What was the person? Not the one, not the passenger.
The driver, chariot
Yeah.
driver, right?
Yeah.
That's symbolic of the intelligence.
Intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you elaborate on the intelligence? Is
Yeah.
it the user in the computer?
So intelligence is, in terms of the analogy of the computer, intelligence is like a CPU, like a processing power in a computer. And mind is like the hard disk.
But if the mind has the thoughts, and the thoughts we can choose, the intelligence is the CPU that processes all the senses and experiences, etc. Like, what can you
What
elaborate
is the
on the
role of the
intelligence?
intelligence?
Yeah, like, who is that? Me? Is that the ego? Is that what I've learned? What is the intelligence? Is
Excellent,
that
yeah.
inner and it's come before? Is it the soul?
Soul.
But the soul is the passenger.
Yeah.
Oh, what? Really?
Yeah. So
Because intelligence could be like that that divine inner
It
thing.
would be like the monitor. If you're looking at it, like looking at the screen, I guess that's the way you look at it.
So the intelligence, it's a nice question. Like, what is intelligence? We are so used to identifying with ourself, meaning, and again the yogic text explained that we are not our minds, and neither are we our intelligence. Then the question is, then who are we? I'm so used to identifying myself with my thoughts, my mind. So the intelligence, your question is then, what is intelligence? If the mind has thoughts, if mind is constantly in this process of accepting and rejecting, what does the intelligence do? So we talked about it briefly. So as soon as the mind decides something is good, the intelligence then steps in and tries to decide how can I maximize this thing, that experience. And if something the mind decides is bad, then the intelligence then thinks, how can I minimize this? So the intelligence is this discriminating faculty. That is what the intelligence does. Intelligence discriminates, and that's why sometimes when you're going through emotional, there's always, in every situation, there's always this conflict between the mind and the intelligence. And the mind is this voice of rationality.
No, the intelligence is the mind of rationality.
Sorry, I said the intelligence is the voice of
The
rationality.
voice of rationality. Yes.
Yeah. Did I hear any other comments? So intelligence, there's always this war between intelligence and the mind. Mind is more emotional, and intelligence is more like practical and rational.
Mind will say, I want this. The intelligence will be like, well, here's how you can get it. or
Heart say,
here's why
I
you
want
shouldn't
this.
want it.
Exactly. Like
Heart says that I want this thing, and then that learning, which we have done throughout our life, like good thing and bad thing, that comes, and that's at that point that conflict happened. Like, should I do this or should I do that?
Right.
It makes
So
sense
that
because
learning basically.
the CPU works on ones and zeros and it's binary. So one is like yes and zero is no. So it's expanding or minimizing.
Right. That's a nice example because the hard disk itself doesn't do any processing; it just stores data, right? So the CPU that's doing. And like a good example is like even eating, or sometimes we binge on certain things we know we shouldn't be doing. That extra cookie late at night, and your mind is saying, come on, it's okay. But the intelligence will say, no, it's a bad idea. Last time you did it, you just really felt horrible about that. So that's the voice of rationality. Intelligence is the voice of rationality, and mind is just like
It feels like intelligence grow with more exposure when you attain knowledge and all that, then your intelligence can go higher and you can make better decisions.
Right.
And the mind is just bringing everything to you, whether it's like accepting, rejecting.
Right. And intelligence, they use in scriptures like Bhagavatam, uses the word intelligence like a sword. Just like you can sharpen a sword, like that can sharpen our intelligence. And one way to do it is by scriptures, by knowledge. That's how we sharpen our intelligence. So the mind, like we discussed, mind can act like waves, constantly getting thoughts. Mind can also act like wind. Like sometimes we have this inner turmoil, and then we quickly become agitated by distress, by these thoughts, and they just build up and build up and build up. Just like you see those hurricanes, they start small, and they keep build up, and once again, momentum. They have enough power to uproot houses and trees, and So that's how forceful and powerful wind can be. So like that, our mind can actually pick up these thoughts. And at first, it's like a really small thought that comes. And then again, it circles back the second time, third time, it builds up and builds up. And if you notice, each time the thought circles back, it gains more and more power. Like, let's say someone said something unpleasant to you. You think about it, okay. Again, the thought comes back, okay, so this is what they said. Third time, the thought comes back, okay. And then again, the more you keep thinking about it, it becomes stronger. And like, who do you think that person is? And then you become really upset. And so that's how the mind acts like the wind. It just circles and circles, and it gains enough momentum to completely. And that's the question I first asked. Have you had that experience where the mind has got the worst of you? Like you said or did something, and later you regret it. You send that message, and right after you send, you feel like, oh, maybe that was a bad idea. That's the mind. That's what the mind does. So these thoughts circle and circle, and at first you might think, okay, it's a bad idea, I shouldn't do it. But then if you let your mind gain that momentum, then soon enough you'll act on it. So like this, the mind can be really forceful like the wind. It can destroy relationships and jobs and different situations. We can wreck our life just by this mind. It seems so innocent, right? Our minds seem really innocent, harmless. But it can destroy relationships and lives. So like this, we see how the mind can be really like a devil, like a wind. Now, how's another way the mind can act? The mind can be like a horse. Horses, they're such a beautiful animal, right? And they can be such a useful animal, but also if the horses are untrained, they can be really hard to control. If untrained horses, they're basically of no good. Like anybody know those Superman movies that used to come in the 80s, 1980s? Christopher Reeve, the actor. So when I was growing up, he used to be my idol, Superman. But the irony is when in his life, and he used to be a big fan of horses, like horse rider, I don't know what the term is, horse rider. But then he met an accident riding a horse. The horse just sort of knocked him off when he was riding, and he landed on his spine, and he got paralyzed. His whole body got paralyzed. What an irony, right? Like Superman spent the rest of his life paralyzed. He couldn't even. All he could do is move his eyes. That's it. He's like paralyzed, neck down, because of a horse that is so unruly. So like that, our mind can completely paralyze our whole life and destroy our life if that horse is untrained. And it said that younger horses are harder to train because they're really unpredictable. Young horses, you need an expert trainer to train young horses. So like that, it said in one of the ancient scriptures called Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, it says, Kaumara Acharit Pragya, Kaumara Acharit Pragya Dharma Bhagavataniha, that at a young age, one should start training the mind. That is the age to start training the mind. Once we get older, our habits are set in stone. It said that the habits are like a shirt made of iron. Once you wear it, it's hard to take it off. That's how habits are. So it said that at a young age, one should start training our mind. But one might think, okay, what do I do now? I'm not young. It's still not too late. One can start training the mind, and we'll discuss towards the end how we can train the mind. So like this, our mind can be our worst friend or best friend or worst enemy, like a horse. Horse can be like such a useful animal, but also the same horse, which is untrained, can completely paralyze your life, like we saw the example of Christopher Reeve. And also another fascinating thing about horses is horses are really active by nature. They have to be worked out. They need a lot of exercise. You can't simply have a horse standing in a stable or whatever the shed is, like a horse barn,
Like a
The-
cow.
Huh?
Studying like a cow.
Yeah. Yeah. So they need to be constantly let loose. They need to have like regular workout. If not, what happens is they develop swelling in their legs. They also have other symptoms of constipation and things like that. They go crazy. They have psychological problems. So horses, they sometimes need to be sort of let loose and given a good workout. So like that, our minds also need a good, healthy workout. If not, you've heard the saying, idle mind is the devil's workshop, right? So, like for example, you see these homeless people sitting on the street.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
The saying is idle hands do the devil's work. That's the saying I know.
I see. Thank you. Idle hands
Do the devil's work. That's
Devil's-
the saying that I was taught.
I see.
I never heard your version, the ones you just said.
I see. Idle mind is the devil's worship.
No. Idle hands.
No, I'm saying,
do
yeah,
the devil's work. Oh, you're saying yours again. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. So yours is idle hands.
It's not mine. It's something I heard from an Irish guy on a construction site.
Sure.
I
Can
see,
you
yeah.
repeat that?
Idle hands do the devil's work.
Do the devil's work.
Yeah.
Because they have
So stay
nothing to
busy.
do, so they
Yeah,
do the
that's what they do.
devil's work.
And memory is intelligence, bro. Memory and intelligence was equal to me.
Also,
I
like,
thought I should tell
if
you
you
that.
don't
Memory
use
and
it, you
intelligence.
lose it.
Yeah. Like the point I was trying to arrive at is the mind needs a good workout. An idle mind can really go crazy, like a devil's workshop.
Yeah. It's like
Ah.
I just want to add in. It's like unemployment has been considered like one of like the worst conditions for anyone to be in. It's because just being there. I think especially during COVID time, maybe a lot of us we were just stuck. We didn't have all the engagements that we used to have, and during that period of time, it became very easy to go crazy. Just locked up, locked inside, not much to do. Like you don't see your friends, your previous engagements aren't there, and then your mind just starts spinning and going crazy, and it just feels like you're just getting like crushed from like inside out, or you're in just like this melancholy, right, or like a depression. It's very dangerous, and it's very it's not a good position to be in.
It's because we are uncomfortable with ourselves.
Yeah, that is definitely one part.
Or we over-identify.
Or
with the
over-identify.
thoughts.
But it's
With
also
the thoughts.
with the thoughts. Also, it's also because our mind
Anyway.
by nature is very active, right? Like Godruma Prabhu said, like it's like a horse. It needs a good workout, and it's always just running around like crazy, right? It always wants to do something. So one tendency is that when we don't like ourselves, right, or we aren't cool with ourselves, right, our mind isn't trained yet, but still it needs to do something. The idea is that if it can't do something positive, then it will do something negative. I think our tendency is to try to say, oh, I don't like the way my mind is. Let me annihilate it. Let me get it to the point where there's nothing, right? There are no waves in the ocean. And that's one yogic perspective, but it's very difficult. It's extremely troublesome. And the other point too is that it's being in that position where we aren't doing anything. It's not that fun either. It's very difficult and it's not as enjoyable as opposed to getting our mind to a point where it can engage in positive activity, right?
Yeah, so basically the idea is the mind needs a good workout, like a positive workout, like you were saying. If not, the mind will engage in negative, destructive habits. So this way, like just like the horses, they need to be constantly given good workout. The mind also needs a good workout. And also just like you see in horses have these blinders, right? They put these blinders so that they don't stray off track. So the mind also sometimes needs these blinders to keep us on track. So like this, we're looking at how the mind can sometimes act in sometimes beneficially and sometimes in a destructive way. But another example is, if you can take a look at another example, the mind can also act like a blotting paper or like a tissue paper, basically. It's really because of its porous structure. It has this high absorbing power. Anything you put in contact with a blotting paper, it just right away just absorbs that. Right, even a tissue paper, you don't have to wait for like minutes. In seconds, it'll just absorb it. So like that, the mind has this high absorbing nature. Whatever is put in contact with the mind constantly absorbs. Whatever is around us, we're constantly absorbing it and drinking it. Whatever situations you expose yourself to, that has been stored in your mind. Like we saw the example of a hard disk, right? Hard disk is storing information. Like that the mind is constantly storing all the information that it is subjected to. So if you subject yourself to negative situations and environment, that is what the content of your hard disk, of your mind is. So like this, it's highly absorbed, it keeps absorbing whatever is put in touch with. And it's like a storehouse of impressions. And here's the interesting thing. the mind will contain all these impressions, not only from your immediate past, but the scriptures explain even from our past lives. But Bhagavad Gita and other books explain that the soul goes on through this journey of many lifetimes. So the mind contains information not only from this life, but also from your past lives. And your subconscious mind has all of this information stored. That's why many times people sort of act in ways which is sort of really unknown to them. Like, why do I have a certain inclination? Like even kids, sometimes they have a certain strange preference that the mothers might think that where has this kid learned this thing from? So they explain that mind has this information from many, many lifetimes, just like a blotting paper. And this information doesn't leave right away. That's why some people struggle with addictions and things like that. They don't go right away because mind has this high retention ability. It just stores like a hard disk and it stays for a really, really long time. Just like a blotting paper. And that's not, as if that's not enough. Sometimes these thoughts that the mind is absorbing, some of these thoughts can go together and sometimes these thoughts are really opposing in nature, just like colors. Like any artist or painters here? Anybody who likes painting? So as, huh?
In past life.
So as you guys might know, certain colors, as painters might know, certain colors mix well and certain colors don't mix well. Like if you try to mix these opposite colors, they produce a grayish, blackish, gray colors, which is of no use. But some colors mix well, like blue and yellow makes green, right? I'm not a painter, so don't quote me. So some colors mix well, and some colors they don't mix well. So like that are thoughts. Some thoughts may go well with each other, but certain thoughts have a disturbing quality to it. When they mix, they produce this mental disturbance. That's why many people go through this mental disturbance because some of the impressions that are subjecting to it, they actually produce this opposing, disturbing, discording. I don't know if that's the word. Discording. Mental discord. Yeah.
Distortion.
Yeah. Yeah, we get it.
What on that? I can relate with having like contradictory beliefs or something, or not really like beliefs because I don't take them on, but you know, what's your thoughts on like the yin and the yang of life, of like, you know, light and dark, or you know, two contrasts that they could be contrast, but they're actually complementary?
Right. So contrast itself is not a bad thing. Contrast actually beautifully highlights two different perspectives. So contrast is not a bad thing. But what we're discussing here is sometimes our thoughts can create disharmony in our mind. So opposites are not necessarily a bad thing. In the language of Bhagavad Gita, they are known as dualities, heat and cold, yin and yang. You know, like summer, winter, and things like that.
Right.
Joy and sorrow.
Like with harmony.
Yeah.
Or maintaining
Yeah.
harmony.
So sometimes the mind can actually absorb these thoughts, which can create mental disturbance. So it's important for us to sort of make sure we subject ourselves to positive environment. That's what we are arriving at. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was also thinking, one example that we could all relate to is the idea of when we have a dilemma. Like, oh, I need to make this big decision in my life, but I want to do this, but I also want to do that, right? We're getting pulled in these two different directions, and we can't come to a single decisive solution, as in we just go one direction. It's like we have these, right, the reins of our mind, right? It's being pulled in like both directions, and it's just a very bothersome, troubling situation, right? We feel very disturbed, right? Very anxious, right? We're in a state of distress, and it's because we can't attain to something meaningful, right? We can't make an actual decision, but we're just getting dragged around by both sides because they're very in opposite directions. Like,
So yeah, like the idea is mind can absorb things really fast, even subconsciously. We don't realize how the mind is absorbing things. And just like the example of a tissue paper. If a tissue paper or a blotting paper or paper towel, if it's wet, it's of no use, right? What are you going to do with a wet paper towel? Like that, the mind, which is already absorbed with a lot of negative impressions, is of no good. That's why it's important for us to have a fresh mind, just like a blotting paper. We have to be careful in what we subject our minds to. And another example, if you have to go deeper into analyzing how the mind acts, sometimes the mind can act like a child. Of course, this kid is well-behaved kid. We don't see kids who are peaceful. But some kids.
Are kids supposed to be peaceful?
Actually, I'm gonna come to that. That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So, like, we see some kids, unlike this kid, really peaceful, and some kids can be a little restless, and so the mind can be like that, can be really restless like a kid. But psychologists say it's normal for kids to be restless. That's the natural state for kids. So kids by nature are restless, and that's the normal condition. There's nothing wrong with kids being restless. So the mind can also be restless like a child. And in fact, it is said, children have 20 times more absorbing capacity, grasping power than adults. That's how children's minds are. They're 20 times more. That's why whatever you learn as a child, that stays with you for the rest of your life. So at a young age, the mind has a high absorbing power and retention power. So like that, the mind at a young age is really, like the point we discussed before, at a young age we should start training. So the mind can act like a child, sometimes it's restless, and also boredom. Sometimes kids experience boredom. That is only, it's not a bad thing. It just means that they're not stimulated enough. If they get positive engagements, then they're properly engaged in positive activities. So like that, the mind has to be engaged. Just like a child, the mind is restless, and like it is said, if you want a child to do something, ask the child to not do it. So like that, the mind can also have this opposing nature. The more you try to force your mind to do something, it would resist.
Don't think of a pink elephant.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
First thing I saw.
Oh, huh?
That was the first thing I saw.
I think yeah, same here, yeah. Also, I know an aphorism too, where it said that when you try to fight your mind, or you try to fight a thought, that actually becomes your quality. Because by fighting it, you sustain it, and you actually become like the thing that you're trying to attack.
So like a child, sometimes the mind, like children, one of the primary qualities is they may not understand the consequences of their action. At the young age, children are mainly geared towards acquiring knowledge, but they might not necessarily understand how to put together that knowledge and understand the consequences of that. So like that, the mind may not understand the consequences of the action. That's where the intelligence kicks in. And usually the difference between the mind and intelligence is mind is usually always focused on short term, or in Sanskrit it's known as prayas, and the intelligence is always thinking in terms of long term, which is shreyas. So that's why the mind always thinking about the immediate benefits, and the intelligence is thinking in terms of long term benefits. So like a child sometimes might not understand the long term consequences of the action. So the mind can also act like that, not understanding the consequences of the action. Another thing, for those of you either have had kids or have experienced babysitting, what is the first thing you do when you have an infant in your house?
You hide all the breakables.
Uh-huh. What was that?
Yeah, child-proof the house.
Yes, you baby-proof, you child-proof the house, right? Chainsaws, all chainsaws, needles, and explosives, all of that goes out of the house. You know, all the plug points.
Shots, needles.
Of course, that's a gross.
We had to do that. We all.
broken
All
refrigerators.
those sharp objects, you seal those plug points, all those things, you baby-proof, you child-proof your home, right? So like that, the mind has this quality like a child to grab onto anything that's put in front. So you have to baby-proof your environment for your mind. That means anything that you feel is not good, put it away. Internet especially, if you know anything you watch or see on the internet is going to drag your mind down, just baby-proof your atmosphere, put that away. Or at your house, if you know that you have an addiction for cookies. I talk about cookies a lot because I have cookie addiction. So if you have a cookie addiction, put that away. Don't have it in your home. Anything you know that's gonna, your mind, like your baby mind, is gonna latch onto it. Just baby-proof your atmosphere for your mind. So like that, the mind can act like a child, not understanding the long-term consequences of its action. So one has to be careful of how the mind works. So we'll take a few more examples and then we'll open the floor for discussion. So another way the mind acts is like a monkey. I don't know if you've had experiences dealing with monkeys, but there's a nice place spiritual place in India called Vrindavan. So anybody who's going to Vrindavan, there's a lot of like forest atmosphere, and there was a lot of monkeys that are let loose. So once I was in Vrindavan and I was observing these monkeys, there was a store, like a shop with a metal roof. And above the metal roof was a tree. And sure enough, what do you see on a tree in Vrindavan? A monkey. So I'm observing this monkey is on the branch of a tree. The monkey jumps on top of the roof of that shop, which is a metal roof. It goes onto the edge of the roof and starts shaking it violently. And then after 30 seconds, just casually walks off as if nothing happened. That was the most normal thing, part of my day. You know, why did you do that for? Like, nothing. That's what I do. So like that, the mind can be really unpredictable, has no rhyme or reason for what the mind does. Really unpredictable. That's one of the main struggles of psychologists and sociologists is the mind is so unpredictable. There's so many flavors of therapy, so many flavors of like behavioral therapy, cognitive therapy, and this and that. So many styles, psychoanalytical, psychodynamic, and because the mind is so unpredictable like a monkey, there's no reason to why or what the mind does. And like a monkey, the mind can also be destructive, like we discussed. If it is not engaged in some positive habits, the mind can often turn towards a negative, take to negative habits and negative qualities. And like a monkey, the mind can also be mischievous, always up to something mischievous. So like it is said, engage your mind before your mind engages you. If you wait, then the mind will engage you in some activity that you don't want to do. So better you engage the mind in some activity before the mind engages you in some activity that you don't want to be doing. So always keep your mind active in positive things. If you wait, that's it. The mind will find some engagement for you. So like this, the mind always is restless and unpredictable. Like a monkey is always swinging from branch to branch. The mind is always indecisive, always swinging from, always going back and forth in decisions. Have you guys had that experience? Mind is always indecisive. Maybe this, maybe that.
I have a
Maybe
question.
I should wear like a blue shirt. Maybe I should wear a red. Maybe blue is better. Yeah, you were saying something?
So is it like this state of mind is going to happen in young age, in childhood, or is it going to be same in old age as like, after 60, 70? Is it same?
Yeah, like it said that the mind doesn't reform by itself. In fact, the older you get, it said the harder it becomes because your habits, all of that. That's why even relationships and for all those who are monks, close your ears. For relationships and marriages and things like that, it said that in the Vedic ancient culture, it said that at a young age, it's advised to enter matrimony, conjugal relationships, because at a young age, we're more adaptable. But the older you grow, that's why certain marriages which are done at a later stage of our life, it's hard to sustain that. Because the mind has its own ways, it's set in stone. So the older you grow, sometimes we might think, oh, maybe if I'm getting older, I'm getting better. That is true if you have some kind of a spiritual reform, some engagement for your mind. Then, yes, it is true. The older you grow, the mind keeps getting reformed. And again, like I said, we'll discuss that towards the end of what's the best way to reform the mind. So if you have such a spiritual technique, then yes, the older the mind gets, the more trained it becomes. But without that, it gets worse and worse. Even addictions and things like that. Ask any person suffering from addiction, does it get better? No, it actually gets worse as time progresses. So like that, the mind, it's better to act on it sooner than later. If you're thinking about a reform, now is the time. Don't wait. Don't delay. Do it today. You hear that? Don't delay.
Do it today.
So like that, the mind is like a monkey, always swinging from decision to decision, always indecisive. And another way the mind can act is the mind can be like a crystal or like a prism, like a crystal. Like whatever light that is you shine on a crystal, that is the color it takes. If you shine a red light, a blue light, whatever light, that's the color, that's the shape it takes. So if you don't like the color of a prism, then change the color. So like the mind is like a prism. Whatever you subject your mind to, that is the quality the mind takes. Like in ancient scripture, Bhagavatam, the word uses karmatmaka. The mind is colored by material activities. You're coloring the mind. You take a brush and you paint the mind with a blue brush or a red brush or a red color. Like that, by our activities, we're coloring our mind. It's like it takes a flavor. So, and the mind itself may not have this innate primal disposition, but it picks up all of these from what we expose our minds to.
And especially when you are choosing the friends.
Yes.
Because Hazrat Ali said, like, you are the byproduct of your friends.
Exactly, that's such a nice point. Association. You know, association is a key factor. It's said that man is known by his association, right? So yeah, association, why? That's because you're subjecting your minds to that environment, and that is what you become. That is what you become. So it's really important to be aware of what are you subjecting your mind to. So be careful of what you subject your mind to. Like my spiritual teacher says, if you don't like what you're subjected to, change the subject. It's one of those simple statements, but it also has a really profound meaning. If you don't like for example, you feel you're subjected to this, or my life sucks, for lack of a better word. My life is horrible, and you know, I don't like this. So my teacher says, if you don't like what you're subjected to, change the subject. So the best way to change the subject is to change the sound vibration. And we'll discuss that towards the end. That's a spoiler. So if you don't like what you're subjected to, change the subject. So like this, mind can be like a crystal, which is always picking up the color what you're subjecting the mind to. And the last analogy we'll see is how can a mind act like is the mind can be like a mirror. So one of the qualities of a mirror is it reflects whatever you put in front of it, right? But what happens when the mirror picks up some dust? Then it loses its reflective quality. So like that, one ancient sage in India, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who's known as the incarnation of Krishna, he compares the mind to a mirror, and he says, Cheto Darpana Marjana. He urges and pleads that cleanse the mirror of the mind. So the mind is like a mirror. And what happens when the mirror picks up dust? It loses its quality. But here's the interesting thing. Why is the mind compared to a mirror? Such a strange analogy, right? A mirror reflects, but what about the mind? Does the mind reflect? Now here is the mysterious quality of the mind. Really mysterious, strange quality. The mind can also reflect what is put in front of it. That's why different people perceive the world differently. In the same situation, two people can be in the same situation, but they're seeing they're seeing two different things. They're having a completely different experience. One is going through a nightmare, and the other person is having the best of their time. So like that, the mind can actually reflect whatever's put, but it depends on the inner state of consciousness. Now, to get even more mystical, the ancient yoga scriptures explain that the soul resides in the heart region. And the soul has a covering, which is the mind. And immediately covering the mind is like the intelligence and the false ego and our body. So the mind is covering the soul. So if the mind has a reflective property, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Shows how the soul is.
Yes, you can actually see yourself through a purified mind. That is why Lord Chaitanya urges that Cheto Darpana Marjana, cleanse the mirror of the heart. If you cleanse your mind by the process of meditation and things like that, you can actually perceive yourself, and that is what is known as self-realization. Sometimes we use the word loosely, self-realization. What does that mean? Self-realization? Realize of self? So you can understand who we truly are by a pure heart. So any faith tradition, whichever background you come from, Islam, Christianity, all of them have the same message, is the spiritual life means to purify our heart. When our heart is sufficiently purified, all good qualities naturally manifest, like compassion, kindness. And those are just a byproduct. So when our hearts, our minds are purified, we can actually see the self. Like imagine you walk in front of a mirror, you see your body, right? But imagine if there's a mirror, you walk in front of a mirror, and you can see the soul. Not the body, but you look at the soul, and you're like, wow, this is what I look like? So imagine if someone gives you that mirror that can show you what the soul looks like. And that mirror is with us, with all of us. It's in our heart. That's the mind. So that's the mirror of the mind. So if you clean your mind sufficiently, you can actually see yourself, and you can see the Supreme Lord, and you can see all the living entities as parts and parcel of the Supreme. And then you will no longer see everybody in terms of designations or upadhis, external labels, black, white, gay, straight, lesbian, this and that. And so with a purified heart, you learn to look at every living entity as a pure soul. And you learn to understand, like Bhagavad Gita explains, one who understands by virtue of comparison. In chapter 6, it explains, by virtue of comparison, one can understand the other person. So by a purified heart, one learns one understands that actually every living entity is just like me. We're all spirit souls, equal in quality. So now, I'll just spend 2 more minutes. Yeah.
May I? I can hold
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
Um,
Actually, yeah, if you...
I can hold it.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
because we are towards the
Go
end.
ahead, go ahead.
So I'll just take 2 more minutes to finally conclude. So first, we looked into what the mind is, right? Like what, to analyze the mind. And we looked at the analogy of a computer, the example of a chariot, and mind as a storehouse of impression. And then we looked at different examples and analogies to further analyze the qualities of the mind. Now the last concluding part is, okay, now that you've understood what the mind can be your best friend or worst enemy. Now the question finally is what can I do to make my mind my best friend? Right? That's the final takeaway we want to leave. We don't want to simply think about the mind or analyze the mind, because there's many psychologists who are doing that. The final takeaway, positive takeaway, is how can I make my mind my best friend? So one of the prime ways is by the process of meditation. Like when we started with a form of musical meditation, right? So there's 2 forms of meditation, and the main form of this meditation is to chant this transcendental sound vibration that we were discussing. And every tradition has a different prayer. This is like a prayer, right? Like every Christianity, Islam, even in Islam there's rosary beads. Christianity also, they have their rosary beads. And like he's showing us, like in Islam there's like a 99 beads, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, 99 name of Allah, like God, and 99 name of the Prophet.
Prophets.
Yes.
Like
They have 100, the beads, 100.
100
Yeah,
beads.
because one is Allahu Akbar. In between those, you'd have to take the pause and say Allahu Akbar between the names.
So every faith tradition has a central aspect. Like even in Christianity, they say, "Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom comes." Right? Hallowed be thy name. So the name is an important aspect of any tradition. Even Buddhists, they all pray in Catholicism, if I'm not mistaken, one of the branches. I don't know if it's Presbyterian or maybe Catholic Church. They have this prayer, "Hail Mary, Mother of God." I forget the rest of the prayer, but there's different prayers, and all of them are focused on chanting the names of God. And whatever tradition you come from, that's fine, chant that name, but the important thing is to chant the names. And one of the effective ways is also chanting this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And there's 2 forms of meditation. One is a personal private meditation, like if you have a prayer bead, you can chant this one whole mantra and flick a bead. That's like a way of counting. And again chant another mantra and again flick a bead. And this way you're engaging your fingertips, you're engaging your tongue in chanting, you're trying to hear, and you're trying to sort of be attentive, you're engaging your mind. And this sound vibration is so powerful and transcendental, it completely cleanses all of the dust in your mind. Our consciousness is completely purified, and please believe me, all of your addiction problems, vices, all of them just completely go away. Yes, it takes time, I'm not gonna lie, it's not an overnight process. All of your problems, vices, addictions, all of them guaranteed. You'll find, and this process of meditation, it's not about being someone else. It's not an artificial position. Like Srila Prabhupada, who's the founder of the Hare Krishna tradition, who brought this saint who came in the 60s, who brought these teachings. And these are non-sectarian teachings. It's not about designations or external labels. So he explains that this is not an artificial imposition of the mind. This is a transcendental sound vibration. By this sound vibration, when we chant, when we hear, it cleanses our mind and purifies our mind. And by this purified mind, we can not only realize ourselves, but we can also realize the world around us. So one way of meditation is a private meditation where we just sing, where we just chant this mantra in a really, in a way we speak, we chant this mantra. And another form is like a musical meditation where we come together and we sing in a musical way. So the first form is in form of a speech, where we just chant this mantra by ourselves. And the nice thing is you can chant this mantra anytime, any place. There are no hard and fast rules. You can chant this mantra anytime if you're walking on the street, if you have this memorized, if you're experiencing some stress, you can chant this mantra. And this mantra you can practice it along with your existing practice. And like one saint in this tradition, Bhaktitirtha Swami would explain that this mantra, if you're a Muslim or a Christian, this mantra makes you better Muslim. If you're a Christian, it makes you better Christian. If you're a Jew, this makes you better Jew. So this is not an artificial imposition or a sectarian process. This mantra is transcendental sound vibration. Just chant this mantra and you'll see your whole life transform. And the nice thing is it's free, right? It doesn't cost you anything. Just try it out for a month. Just see what happens. Do a dare. It's like a new year just passed. Do a dare. Let me dare myself. Let's see what happens. Maybe something crazy might happen. It's fun. Let's try it out. Even if it's crazy, you can tell people something weird happened. You're not going to believe what happened, right? I heard this story recently, past Sunday. Some really strange things happen. So all of us deep within are looking for something strange. Why not try it out? So just chant this mantra and see what happens. Try it for a month. And just to do a quick demo, shall we do a quick 5 or 10 minute singing?
Sure. Yeah.
And then after that, we'll have a nice dinner, yeah. And can we have like a quick 2-minute reflection? Just a 2-minute reflection because we also want to spend some time singing. So any last minute concluding thoughts? Anybody who's not spoken before? Yeah. Or you wanted to?
Yes, please.
No, I kind of just sat with it and I think I have the answer. Like it's kind of like, well, it's not really a question. I just want you to expand upon. Like, I guess from what I understood, the Hare Krishna, it's kind of like going back to the drawing board, so to speak, like in using the senses in a way that you can, using the horse analogy to like train it, so it's not, or the monkey, just doing things rampantly or like things like that. So you can kind of like substitute all the misalignment or the habits picked up, whatever, to pivot or like alchemize the things that hold us back, or
Alchemize.
you say a better Jew or a better Christian, like a better
Muslim.
A pure soul.
What? Or because what if the contrast offers us the idea of something else, or we're still going in circles but you're going forward, like the shell, then isn't it kind of like necessary? It's like, I don't know, I don't have a question. Mostly I want you to expand upon like the relationship with the mind and the heart. If you said that they were interchangeable,
Right.
How is it that the mind blocks the heart sometimes, or the heart can be blocked?
In that sense, I think what you're talking about could be the mind is actually, we mistake it for the mind, but it is actually the false ego. And
Wait, can you repeat that?
so, I mean to say that when the way that the word mind is being used here, where it's controlling the other thing,
The mind being the reins to the senses.
sort of, but I think that's more self-control than anything, because I believe that the soul is the driving force, and it feels like the driving force. And if you try to control the soul through false means, then it just doesn't do anything. That's the ego, actually, not the mind or the intelligence. So I'm not sure.
The nice thing about this process is you don't have to control the minds, quote unquote. The nice thing about mantra meditation is just chant the mantra. Automatically you'll see your life reform. See, it's not that artificially you have to do something, artificially you have to control my thoughts, artificially you have to give something up. Just chant this mantra, it's like a trip, it's like a ride. You'll automatically find your mind reform. That's the beauty of this. Like I've seen one of my friends, he used to have a sex addiction. Like he used to have an addiction to prostitutes, and it was a big thing. He tried many things, like rehab, and nothing worked. And he started the process of mantra meditation. It took him time, but he didn't have to artificially decide that I'm not going to go to prostitutes, or it was
Because
natural.
you're cleaning the mirror.
Exactly.
Because the mind is the mirror with the heart. Can you repeat how you said that? The
mirror-
mind and the heart and the mirror.
Yeah, so first the mind and the heart are the same thing. So the mind is compared to the mirror of the heart, or the mirror of the mind. You can
The
both.
soul. Mirror of the soul.
No, the
Oh.
mirror of the heart,
Yeah.
basically. So in Sanskrit, when they draw an analogy, like a simile. They'll compare one thing to another to say that's how it functions. So here, the mind or the heart, like I said, interchangeably, is compared to a mirror. So they'll say the mirror of the heart. You see, the mirror of the heart, meaning you're comparing the mirror to the heart. So all it means.
It reflects your inner experience,
Right.
which is the soul. But that's why I said there's certain things that are kind of necessary, addiction, this, that, whatever, so you can kind of shed yourself or outgrow that in a way.
So
Long
yours-
term speaking.
So you're basically asking if addictions are necessary?
Necessary. It's like escaping reality in a sense, because you don't want to look at either yourself or something, you're filling the void instead of like sitting with the soul, the self, not the George or the, job or whatever, but sitting with that space that you don't want to. And then instead of filling it with all these things,
Can I say
you
something?
can fill it in
Yeah,
with
yeah.
this, Hare Krishna.
I'm sorry,
You're
I'm not an
expanding
authority
upon-
on any
go
of
ahead.
these things, but I think there's something missing here from this conversation. It's like the senses are actually like a way for us to perceive the material world, and we're not supposed to be connecting to that. We're supposed to be trying to go to the higher transcendental world. So you're trying to train your senses to not think of all these material things and actually think of more spiritual things. I think that's like a part of this that might be missing.
More like a cleansing,
I think I was.
cleansing your soul.
Like,
The
like he said,
senses
your
are part
thoughts,
of the body.
right? Everything towards spiritual.
So we're getting closer. You made a really nice point, actually. The senses are always perceiving. But then the nice thing about this process is you don't have to shut your senses. Like basically, I'm not allowed to see anything. The senses will still function.
You use them for Krishna consciousness.
Exactly. You got it. So
Yeah,
it's,
because, can I say something?
Yeah, yeah.
Because the
Hey,
soul
come.
actually, the real us, who the soul is, does not belong to this realm. And it belongs to the realm of God. And that's what we are trying to do, that when we are cleansing the mind or the heart, it's whatever we have accumulated in all these lifetimes of being here, the material things we have, like a blotting paper we have collected. Now because we are connecting back to God through either Islamic way or any other way, you're trying to connect to the Lord and saying His name. Now your consciousness is now connecting more towards the divine and towards Him, back to Him, rather than whatever you accumulated on all these lifetimes.
Can I say
So
something?
Oh,
this
one
is
more
what
thing. I'm
we're
sorry,
trying
real
to
quick. I
do.
don't mean to be rude. There's actually scientific proof that the heart has its own mind.
Yeah, there's 40,000, the heart has
It's
40,000
theoretical still,
neurons.
right? But they think
Yeah.
that the heart has
So
its
the
own
second
mind. So
dimension.
what you're saying is not really far-fetched at all.
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
nice, really
Yeah,
further.
And people don't even know if the brain is actually the real mind or the heart is. Scientists have just now started to analyze it because the heart works independent of the brain.
Yeah, even like
It's actually a new thought. It's really being proven right now.
people
Wow.
had
Just like
the
the brain of the
transplants.
gut.
They had transplants
feeling.
and they had
Yeah.
memories from the
Yeah,
other
and-
person
Right.
of the heart.
A heart transplant,
Taoist
right? That's one of the proof.
internal alchemy,
Exactly.
they say that there's 3 brains, and the heart is one brain, the gut is one
The gut,
brain,
right.
and then the actual brain is one
Right.
brain. And they say the same thing, that the heart is where consciousness is seated, and the brain is where you observe and discern reality or make judgments. and then the gut is your awareness of the cosmic or your internal sensations, and it's like that's where you get gut feelings from. It's your heart is like a messenger from your heart. When something bad's about to go happen, you get a gut feeling. So it's like the heart is the experience, and it's like you said, it's a crystal. So negativity is just the ray, the flashlight you're beaming onto that experience. So when you're doing the Hare Krishna chant, you're just changing the ray of the light.
Exactly. So maybe you can put it to demo now.
Yeah, let's try this.
Let's do it. Let's get some
And in Islam, we usually chant La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, and that really helps, especially when you are in stress. So
So
yeah.
we just sing for 5 minutes, and like we discussed, kirtan is a call and response format. So when the singer is singing, just try to hear. Basically, it's not a constant singing process. So when the singer is singing, try to hear as opposed to singing, and then the audience responds. So it's like a call and response.
Do you think maybe everyone wants to get up and engage our other senses?
Let's engage all our senses. Let's get some ecstatic dancing in.
No, the legs are numb.
If you wanna dance, that's also. Feel free to do that. Jimmy, would you like to lead us into a dance move?
Oh, yes.
You know the
Swami step.
Yes.
The Swami step.
So, if you guys love dancing, just follow our Jimmy. He's a good, he'll show you some.
Yeah. So you just get your arms up, right? mind a little bit.
I wasn't expecting speaking of cleaning your mind.
And now we've engaged our tongues in a certain way. Now we can engage our tongues in a different way by taking spiritually prepared prasad.
I feel it in the lungs and the heart. Well, we're definitely alive.
Thank you very much.
Again. Yeah. Great. Tell them what is your name.